Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Joseph Stone, CEO of IPM, International Partners in Mission, and a proud member of the City Club. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. James P. Keane, Vice Principal of Catholic Memorial High School in Boston. Right now, as we speak, Pope Francis is leading a gathering of some 200 Catholic leaders. Reporting and analysis coming out of the Synod on the family makes it clear that Francis is using this as an opportunity to engage his bishops and others in a lively dialogue that may actually have an impact on Catholic doctrine. Regardless of the outcome, the approach and what we have seen of Pope Francis in the last year and a half indicate he is clearly a new kind of papal leader. As the world's first Latin American pope, he comes with an important cultural connection to one of Latin America's most important contributions to Catholic dialogue, liberation theology. Though it should be said that even as a younger Jesuit leader, Francis never openly embraced the doctrine. And that's part of the landscape that Jim Keane will explore with us today. Over the past 17 years, Dr. Keane has earned a reputation as a strong leader, a creative and strategic school innovator, and a collaborative change agent. Since 2006, Dr. Keane has also served as an advisor to cross-cultural networks of Seoul, South Korea, and to Campus Bridge International of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and worked with partners in Vietnam, Canada, China, Korea, throughout Latin America, and in Spain to create flourishing international student exchange programs in college preparatory high schools throughout the United States. In 2001, Dr. Keane earned his doctorate in political theology and political philosophy from Marquette University. He also holds master's degrees from Yale University and Emmanuel College. He is a published academic and a member of the Catholic Theological Society of America and the American Academy of Religion. He is married to Eileen, a pediatric nurse practitioner and former Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala. Jim and Eileen are the proud parents of 3 children, Anne-Marie, Michael, and Sean. And of course, Dr. Keane is a member of the IPM International Board of Directors and has been a great friend of me personally and a partner to all of us at IPM for many years. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. James P. Keane.
Thank you, Joe, and good afternoon, everyone. In Roman Catholic theological discussions about the poor and marginalized, the works of Gustavo Gutiérrez are often invoked. Gustavo Gutiérrez is a Peruvian priest who has dedicated his life to working among the poor in the Pueblo Jóvenes or young towns of Lima, Peru. He possesses a deep Christian faith and a commitment to revolutionary struggle. He is also the best known and most widely read proponent of Latin American liberation theology. He is often called the father of liberation theology, and his text, A Theology of Liberation, is lauded as the most lucid, direct, and powerful statement of the heart of liberation theology. By many accounts, liberation theology is the single greatest theological movement of the past century, and it is likely that all subsequent theological developments will have to answer to it. Gutierrez's reflections start with a conscious commitment to the poor. As he sees it, the goal of liberation is to give reason for our hope from within a commitment that seeks to become more radical, total, and efficacious. It's to reconsider the great themes of the Christian life within this radically changed perspective and with regard to the new questions posed by this and these commitments. His theology does not furnish us with new content or new theological themes, nor does it develop the new concept of God, a new doctrine of humanity or salvation. Indeed, it's not different qua theology. What sets it apart is that it incorporates the theological approach of classical theology, but recasts it from its own specific theological viewpoint. Its reflections start with a concrete encounter with poor persons and strive for ever deeper experiences of solidarity. Instead of beginning with Revelation or the Bible or dogmas, as does traditional Roman Catholic theology, it starts with the poor and regards them as an all-determining theological source. Traditional themes of Christian theology are then examined in light of this orientation. For Gutiérrez, the experiences of the materially poor and the experiences we of wealth and privilege have with the materially poor become the hermeneutical lens, the interpretive lens, through which Christian scripture is correctly interpreted and understood. Gutiérrez argues that all theology must be rooted in solidarity, in the life of a community of faith that has itself made a preferential option for the poor. Theology does not take the experiences of poverty and the life of the poor as its starting point. In his words, fails to be authentic Christian theology. This is powerful stuff. Consider, for instance, the role that solidarity plays in animating IPM immersion trips. Through its various immersion programs all over the world, IPM itself has become a very powerful, very effective mechanism that bridges the divides of class in education, economics, religion, and geography. IPM solidarity immersion trips do two things. They provide necessary financial resources to perpetuate IPM mission projects around the globe, and that's also important. But maybe more importantly, the immersion solidarity trips themselves become the catalyst to change hearts and minds. The immersion trips become the vehicle that allow the people with means to know the poor by name, to enter into their struggles, and to share their hopes, even if briefly. As a group, we need to make sure that those kind of immersion experiences, those solidarity experiences, we need to make sure that they're long-lasting. Solidarity is not ephemeral selfies with poor people in Facebook. It is not building homes while poor people look on. It is getting to know the poor by name. According to Gutiérrez, the poor acquire theological dimension when considered in light of God's efforts throughout history as described in Scripture to align with the poor and forgotten. Speaking to Catholic Christian audiences, Gutiérrez explains that it is with, in, and among the poor that Christ himself has promised to be present. And thus, in a very real way, the poor become the privileged sanctuary and sacrament of Christ's presence. Over the past 4 decades, there's been a lot of growth and development in Gutiérrez's work, and I'm going to truncate a lot of that in just a few short minutes. Although it may not be evident in his early writing, clearly his later work makes it very obvious that solidarity is the key. Solidarity which involves a social, concrete, one-to-one relationship with poor persons also includes with it a pastoral, social, and political gesture on the behalf of the poor. And that these two parts of solidarity, that is the essence of his theology. For him, solidarity includes, but also goes beyond being supportive, of liking, or of being inspired by the cause of a group of people or a class. It involves getting to know the poor by name and friendship with the poor. He writes, if there's no friendship with them, the poor, and no sharing of the life of the poor, then there's no authentic commitment to liberation. Gutiérrez uses Scripture to make his case. One passage he uses, one that many in this room might be familiar with, is Matthew 25. It is an interesting passage because here we find a one-to-one correspondence between God and neighbor in need. It's also interesting because it's the only passage in the New Testament that describes the Last Judgment and the criteria that will be used in the Last Judgment. So if you're not familiar, in the parable of the Last Judgment, we find the story of the glorified end-time appearance of the Son of Man. And he separates the people before him as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. The Son of Man welcomes the righteous into the heritage of the kingdom with the haunting words, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And the righteous, these are the ones who are going to heaven, they say, "How's that possible? Lord, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, a stranger, a naked, or in prison?" And he says, "As you did it to the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." The poor we feed, the thirsty whose thirst we quench, the naked we clothe, are concrete persons whom we seek out and encounter. And in that process, the presence of God is revealed in a most tangible way. The poor, because of their need, because of their poverty, provide a privileged meeting ground with God. By equating the needy with neighbor, Gutiérrez radicalizes the relationship between the love of God and the poor. Neighbor is not necessarily the person next door, but the poor neighbor, the one in need of food, drink, clothing, compassion, and love. And he adds to that, the poor neighbor is the one in whose path we place ourselves. So I grew up in a fairly wealthy, middle-class neighborhood. My neighbor, yeah, he was in need if he needed a lawnmower, all right? But that's not what Gutiérrez means. Our neighbor is the person in whose path we place ourselves, and it's a need. It's a tangible. It's thirst, it's drink, it's clothing, it's medical care. Solidarity means that we, who are people of means and privilege, must get to know the poor by name. It means that as disciples of Christ, we must cast our lot with them, and that only by doing so will we ever really know the needs of the poor and how to best help them with those needs. And when we cast our lot with the poor, I don't think Gutiérrez means that we should simply simplify our lives, although that is important. I think he means that part of solidarity requires us to wade into the iniquity of poverty, the very poverty which causes premature death and disease. And I know that these words resonate for people in this room in a very real way. The poor we meet live amid exploitation and addiction and illiteracy and violence. Gutiérrez challenges us existentially, forcing us to consider the extent to which our notion of Christian discipleship must move beyond personal piety towards responsibility and compassion with the poor, suggesting that our own salvation is somehow bound up with the plight of the poor, and that the face of the crucified Christ that we seek is found in the tortured visage of the poor. Although Gutiérrez is the person who really pushed solidarity into the forefront of contemporary Roman Catholic ecclesial consciousness, the idea behind it is not new. Solidarity is really as old as the church itself. It's rooted in the Gospels and the life of the early church and the lives of various reformers throughout history. The mystery of the encounter of God and the person of neighbor has merely been in the hands of liberationists like Gutiérrez, taken on a new social and political description. And the implications really are profound. Solidarity threatens to transform our church and our world by forcing us to consider that theology is not theology, is not reflection upon the Word of God received and practiced, if it's not received and practiced in a community of faith that is connected to the lives of the poor. It suggests that the center of our life as a community of faith is not the Eucharist as such, as traditionally understood, but the concrete love we share with the poor, who are our neighbors and friends, that is itself liturgically thematized in the breaking of bread and the sharing of wine. And when the idea of solidarity and its complement, the teaching of the preferential option for the poor, when they're fully realized and received by the Catholic Church, by this church, when they become fully part of the fabric of the Christian communal identity, our world will be vastly different from what it is now. Solidarity will require the church to go beyond mere postures of moral indignation and non-binding prophetic utterances. Solidarity will require the church, I think, to engage like Archbishop Oscar Romero in profoundly Christ-like prophetic and institutional acts of solidarity with the poor. Solidarity will, I think, have to involve serious institutional divestment of power, wealth, and prestige. Such solidarity with the poor as a protest against the existence of poverty in the world will, I think, require the church of the diaspora to sincerely and deliberately ally itself with outcasts, with those on the margins of social and political power. And this kind of solidarity, Gutierrez is quite clear, means commitment to the poor. It means to be inside the world of the poor, to be sensitive to, but more than this, to enter the world, the deprivation of the poor, in order to know the world of the poor. So how's that all sound? Great? Now, just so that you all know, I mean, I think this sounds great too. I see it's embedded in Scripture. There's a huge history to this. But when Pope John Paul II became Pope in the late 1970s, he became convinced that certain implications of Vatican II, such as the elevation of the laity and ecumenism, and the decentralization of Roman power, and with it, Gutierrez's theology of liberation, needed to be reined in. And he used a mechanism within the church, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, to help him do that. And the person who ran that was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became the successor to Pope John Paul II. The Roman Catholic Church never silenced Gutierrez or censured him, but it did issue two critical instructions on liberation theology. It also systematically replaced sympathetic bishops all across Latin America, and over several decades asserted a high level of theological hegemony. For liberation theology, the effects of those actions were devastating. A cold chill ran through the church for decades, and in many ways it's still here. And social engagement virtually stopped in its tracks while efforts were made to focus upon liturgical reforms, as if we just got the words of the Eucharist, of the Mass right, then everything would be fine. And for many millions of Catholics, a church of solidarity and relevance and engagement in the life of the poor faded away into a church of irrelevance. Pope John Paul II's efforts were continued by his successor, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. But then something happened. A year and a half ago, a new pope was elected, a pope from Latin America. And one of the first things he did was to invite Gustavo Gutiérrez to Rome for a chat. It's unheard of. It was unheard of that this would happen. And then over several months, a series of gestures were made, suggesting that liberation solidarity might be coming out of the shadows. The new pope, for instance, if you remember this, on Holy Thursday, Catholics reenact the Last Supper and wash the feet of the apostles. We know, of course, that all apostles are men. So in the past, that's what the Pope has been doing. And Ratzinger was really tight on that too, making sure that the people whose feet were washed were men. But Pope Francis did something else. He had women, and he had Muslims, and he had criminals, and he washed their feet as well. He also divested himself of the trappings of the imperial pontiff, and Benedict was particularly taken with such trappings, and he has really done away with this. He wears a wooden cross. He doesn't want to live in the apartments of the previous pope. It's much, much more informal. And when President Barack Obama met Pope Francis last year, Obama presented the Pope with a box of seeds, and it's a symbol. The leaders of two nations, and certainly the church, they speak symbolically. So Obama gives him a box of seeds, all right, to symbolize the new start between Rome and the U.S. And the seeds, curiously, were housed in a custom-made chest, and the wood from that chest came from the timber of the oldest cathedral in the United States. How touching, how thoughtful. What did Pope Francis give to Obama? He gave him two papal medals. One was inscribed with the word hope. Hope. One of the evangelical virtues, of course he did that. But hope was also the slogan of the Obama campaign, remember? Obama offered hope for a nation weary of war and longing for a new way of politics. And indeed, Obama's second book, The Audacity of Hope, So what was the word inscribed on the second medallion? Solidarity. Solidarity. Not Obama's word, but Gutierrez's. And for an institution that speaks in symbols, I find this fascinating. It is also fascinating that the new head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Archbishop Muller, co-authored with Gutierrez a book on liberation theology. Written in German, the Italian edition was just published a few months ago, with the announcement that plans are underway to canonize Archbishop Oscar Romero. We are not out of the woods yet. We are not out of the woods yet. And this is about the restoration of liberation theology. Understand that Ratzinger and Pope John Paul II saw themselves as the restorationists to bring us back before Vatican II got out of control. And what I think we might be seeing is a restoration of solidarity. It's coming back out of the shadows. We're not out of the woods yet. As Tom Groom of Boston College says, let's hope the new pope has a good food taster. But we are seeing serious signs. We are seeing serious signs of substantive change. Conservatives will tell you, no, it's just a change in tone. I don't think so. Not now. The Catholic Church, we're seeing serious signs of change in the Roman Catholic Church, and thankfully, real signs of an appreciation and restoration of solidarity. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dan Malthorpe, Chief Executive here at the City Club. It's great to see all of you. We're very, very fortunate, Jim, to have you address us today and provide some context for understanding what's actually happening at the Vatican right now. Today at the City Club, we are enjoying a special program with James P. Keane, Vice Principal of Catholic Memorial School, discussing liberation theology, its past and its future. We'll return to Jim momentarily for our traditional City Club question and answer period, and we encourage you all to formulate your questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and they don't have to be in English. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our webcast, which is sponsored by the University of Akron. Our forums that are carried live on 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, and 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. This Friday, thanks to our partnership with IPM, on October 17th, we will welcome Rick Steves, European travel expert. For more information on that program or any of our other upcoming programs, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's program, as I said, is presented in partnership with IPM, International Partners in Mission. We thank you very much for your support and your partnership. And now it's time for the City Club Q&A. We do welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding our microphone today is our Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky. Who's got the first question? Because I'll come up with one if nobody else does. There we go. Thank you.
May I ask two questions really quickly? Sure. Do you have any sense of a timetable for canonizing Oscar Romero?
No, I have no sense of time. I know these things take a while.
Secondly, could you say a little bit about the preferential option for the poor as Dr. Paul Farmer has extended it to medical care?
Yes, of course. So actually, part of my dissertation was a little critical of Gutierrez. He wants the church to make a preferential option for the poor. So it means that we'll always be there. It means future generations will always find themselves already within a community of faith, within that community. So in some ways, that's, once that's established, and solidarity is the experience that characterizes and defines that. Okay.
This question probably also reflects an understanding that I have of liberation theology and Gutierrez's liberation theology. I mean, you have articulated very well the implications of liberation theology for us. But I wish you'd say something about what impact and what it meant for the poor themselves, because I think that's what the powers that be felt most threatened by.
Right. Interesting enough, with liberation theology, there's several Rome was threatened by several things. One of them was the decentralization of power. And what liberation theology sparked, not necessarily by Gutierrez, but certainly by others, is that theology can be done at the base level, that we ourselves can reflect upon the gospel. And those insights are equally valid to those done in another particular community, such as Rome. And for Rome, that was really quite difficult. They want to speak universally, and it's the tension between the universal and the particular. I have been through to Latin America several times, and I started going in 1986, and I lived in a pueblo joven outside of Lima, one of the largest, best organized base Christian communities there. And liberation theology was alive and well. And you know, we talk about theology like it's an academic discipline. It was really a way of life for them. And going back to El Salvador in subsequent years, it's sad that the impetus has been, the dynamism and impetus has been drained. And I think that's really, you know, Pope John Paul II did a lot of wonderful things, don't get me wrong. But in terms of liberation theology, I think this was a blown opportunity. I think they'd really tried to put cold water on something that was really flourishing. And so, correct. I am, of course, a North American. I'm looking at it from my point of view. But, wow, I just think in terms of lay leadership and the way the church could be, we're now back where we were 40 years ago. We have to go back to where we were in '79. Yeah.
We've just seen a recent report that 54% of the children in the city of Cleveland live in poverty. The Catholic Church in the Cleveland Diocese has closed churches in the central city, engaged in suburbanization, and view of many people, it's pretty much abandoned the poor in the city of Cleveland. And the whole Church in the City program that was instituted by Bishop Pella some years ago has been pretty much discarded and abandoned. Where in the United States do you see any bishops really entertaining and promoting solidarity with the poor and a preferential option for the poor? Where is any leadership in the United States bishops coming from?
Okay, you'll hear pause, long silence, but you're going to see a few coming out of the woodwork. It's amazing to me how Pope Francis speaks, and suddenly the bishops we've known to be traditionally conservative are changing their tune. So I really have not seen a lot of it. I understand, like, even the chill on liberation theology went far beyond that. Any kind of political activism that people were involved in this country, everyone had to pause. Liturgical reform became really, really important. Like, the most important thing. What I thought you were going to say in your question was, how do you make this link between the concern of liberation theology with the poor in the first world when we have suffering here? And I do think that solidarity is the way. I work in a school, I work with schools. Solidarity, this experience of solidarity, making kids from North America connect with kids, for instance, in South America or in Asia or in Africa or in India, that will change their life. They will come back. Their voting habits will change. Their career options will change. The way they change their families will change. That's kind of this work that IPM is involved in that I find so exciting. That is the future, you know. And we will see, you know, it's intergenerational, and we will see intergenerational dividends with solidarity.
Yeah, building on the last question a little bit, there's kind of a convergence between the idea of preferential option for the poor and solidarity, and the idea that economic disparity and inequity is a real problem. It's not only a problem for the poor, it's a problem for the rich, because it impacts very heavily what we can do and how quickly we can do it for things such as climate change, which is really the big problem we all face. So thinking about that, do you have any idea of how we could reestablish in the developed world real base ecclesial communities that will help people not only be in solidarity with the poor, but be active in their own
Yeah.
liberation.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's the key. And understand, for instance, the IPM immersion trips. Those of you who've gone on these trips, it's overwhelming, your world changes, and then you come back and you quickly go back. You might quickly go back to where you were. Now, I'm at an extraordinary school. We run 13 of these mission projects a year. And our kids go back several times. And so they will say that, well, the first timers, then the first flush of these trips, you go, every kid comes back and writes an essay. My life changed when I got off the plane. It's like, well, what's wrong? You never saw an airport? And clearly that's not what happened. And you're not that fragile and you're not that shallow that coming off the airport changed your life. But what happens is over a period of time, the reflection deepens. And that's why I think of all the things that have to happen, you have to know them by name. You have to know the poor people by name. And you kind of you come back, and then the challenge is, I think you could create comunidades de base. I think you can create small base Christian communities among the people who've gone back. And that has actually happened in our schools, is that there's a sense that we've shared this experience, and I'll talk to you as soon as you have this. I'm not sure if that's really what we want, but that's definitely one way, and it politicizes them. And the term that came out of the 60s was conscientization. And these kind of experiences rock your world. And getting back to your question, sir, is when you've had that kind of experience, you come back and then you recognize the poverty that you're around. I got involved in work in soup kitchens in New York City after I went to Peru. I came back and it was like, suddenly this was what I had to do. And I think we'd see more of that with these kind of immersion solidarity experiences.
Jim, thank you so much for being here and joining us at the City Club. I have a clarifying question and then another question, but you've used the term base communities a couple of times, right. And I'd like to invite you to just explain what that means for the uninitiated.
Okay, so when I went to Peru, I said, well, what are the base communities? And they didn't know what the heck I was talking about. And the reason is because, well, this is just how we do church. And in some cases, it could be just small groups of people, the size of the people at this table, for instance, sharing scripture and talking about and relating their experiences of God or life or with the poor among one another. It's not a parish, it's much smaller than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now for my other question, which may broaden our conversation somewhat. Up till now, we've been really focused on liberation theology as a theology and how it informs the practice of Catholics. My question has to do more broadly. Liberation theology seems to be motivated by a populist impulse and an impulse to democratize the church in a small d democratized kind of fashion. Last year, on the very stage that you stand on, Father Helmut Schuler spoke from the Austrian Priests Initiative, and he spoke about in his perception, it is time that the Church begin to allow women to serve as priests. It is time to remove the restrictions on homosexuality, and that homosexuality, of course, is what's being discussed. One of the many things in family life that's being discussed by the Synod right now, and I'd like to ask you to kind of connect some of these dots for us and help us understand where you think the Church is going under Pope Francis's leadership with respect to some of these very thorny but very important issues.
Really hard to read his mind, but I read, a couple days ago, I read his interview with America. If you remember, as soon as he was elected, he had an interview, a long-ranging interview with America Magazine, and people were shocked because it didn't go through the normal channels. It was really direct. The first question was, "Who are you?" And he answered, he paused, and then he said, "I am a sinner." He's like, Pope's not a sinner? And my hunch is we're seeing something very, very different. In that same interview, he talked about an experience he had when he fell in love in the seminary. And he was at a wedding, a family wedding, and met a guest there and fell in love with her. And it was real, and it was legitimate, and he struggled with it. He came back to the seminary, and it was like, why do I have to make a choice between being married or a priest? And I think it's such a refreshing. It's so refreshing. It's so open. And it just seems so honest and real. I don't know where it will go. I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle. And that's the curious thing about the Pope. Everything he says, I mean, he's moving this institution in a very different direction. It's going to be really hard to turn the dial back now. And when he did the interview in America, huge numbers of young Jesuit priests in the seminaries, they were writing letters in incredible support, pushing this dial. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know really where it's going to go. But I want to go another suggestion about solidarity. I think Gutierrez is giving us an insight into something that's really been a dynamic within Roman Catholic missiology in the 60s. Congregations were told, send 10% of your people and send them to Latin America, and they did, and they had this incredible experience. But it is possible that this experience that we call solidarity, we're seeing it through a theological lens. I'm seeing it through a theological lens. Some of you might be seeing it through a philosophical lens. It might be anthropological. And I've done a lot of work recently in China, and I've been meeting people with great means and resources in China with powerful personal experiences who are as committed to the poor as the people in this room. And to me, and I'm embarrassed to say it, how is that possible? You know, did you read Matthew 25? You know, no, they didn't. They're not even using those categories. But it makes me think that there's something much more human and universal about this experience than I think we've let on. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Good question I have is, one of the things that I think is critically important to think about, as you've characterized it, when we think about the preferential option for the poor, those who are materially poor. I'm wondering whether or not expanding the notion of solidarity to think about others who are spiritually poor,
yes,
or civically poor,
right,
or
yeah,
poor of conscience, and if we begin to think about broadening the interpretation of solidarity to really begin to think about where individuals come into the dialogue and how we can really mutually interact with one another to a place where all boats rise with the tide.
I hear you. I think I hear you. But I've been living for several decades with a magisterium that says it's not really blessed are the poor, it's the blessed are the poor in spirit. And I get that. And like no matter what school, I work in a fairly affluent school, but half of our kids are from broken homes, and they're suffering, and there's poor in spirit, and there's addiction, and just like in every school, and like every American family. And there's loss, and there's apathy, and there's hopelessness, and suicide, and all that. Gutierrez is saying, though, that there is something about material poverty. And maybe it's a corrective. Maybe that's how we should see it, as a corrective. But there really, don't get your eye off that ball. There really is something there. And maybe once you start addressing that, maybe that can allow you to look at other things as well. But yeah, the material poverty and what that means. It also means suicide and addiction and violence and all that. Yeah. I think I hear what you're saying, but I think Gutierrez is saying, and probably as a corrective to the magisterium, this is no, it's just they romanticize it's just the poor in spirit. He's saying, no, it's not. It's not, and certainly for our country, certainly for people in the United States and in Europe, we have to be aware of how much we are consuming. We have to be aware how much we're consuming of the world's resources, how we husband our wealth, how we can help those people without. Okay.
Hi, James.
Yes.
So your point that you were making about going from the universal to the particular and the tension that is created there. I mean, I'm hearing that throughout the room, throughout your presentation, and also I'm feeling that because I want to walk with the poor, and yet am I being called to drain my resources in order to be there? I mean, at what point does solidarity mean giving so much that it hurts? And am I effective at stewardship if it means that we're losing the level of capital and the level of security financially that we need to maintain, I mean, our lifestyle, of course, but that's the tension, I think, for me.
Right. I mean, I was using universal in particular as a way to understand authoritative church teaching, so that the church, one way of looking at the Pope is as a kind of referee. He tells you where the boundaries are, and that's what the magisterium should try and do. And within that tension, it becomes like, well, you know, who's really outside the box, you know? And so I think there is a need to do that, and to kind of keep people in the, well, this is really kind of what we're believing. As Catholics, this is kind of what we believe. But what you bring up is, I mean, aren't we all challenged this way? Aren't we all challenged? I mean, when you go to, you know, who said this? You know, and the missionaries who say, you know, it takes 20 years to get used to a cold shower. It takes like 1 minute to get used to a hot shower. I mean, it's like, when is enough? You know, I live with the poor. You know, does that mean I go without? Do I change school systems so my kids go to an inner city school so that I'm in solidarity with the poor? These are all really deep personal questions. I'm not going to answer for you, and we're all twisted. I am like Pope Francis. I am a sinner. But I think we're all, you know, if we can move into the experience of solidarity, get to know the poor by name, so it's not an abstraction to us. I think we'll start making personal choices, you know, that help. I think simplifying your life, of course, is a great idea. But, I mean, do you pack up and move and live in a third world environment? Maybe. And some will do this. And, dear God, man, you're there all the time. But some of us will do this. Some of us can't do that. But there may be another way. You know, like, that's why I really feel so gratified by the immersion experiences, because I do see long term. Education is a vocation of the future. We plant seeds, you know, that one day will be planted. And these kind of experiences, I mean, it's intergenerational dividends. We don't want just kids going on these IPM immersion trips. We want their children going too. We want to change their lives. And wow, anyway, that's all I got. Good one though. It's a tough question, Doug. Please don't ask him a tough question.
Okay, next question.
Sure.
You mentioned President Obama in your earlier comments, and that gave me the hook to ask the question that I came here with. So this just came up among my colleagues last week. I myself was a religion major in college, but I don't actively do theology every day now. When President Obama's association with Reverend Wright came into the news, I was really excited as someone who doesn't do theology to hear theology in the news. And like I said, this just came up among my colleagues. How do you respond to the general impression that you may hear, as I have heard, oh, right, then we found out he had that racist priest? Like, that's the takeaway that a lot of people bring, and that a lot of people have, and how do you respond to that?
Well, I respond that he's a Muslim. So, you know, I mean, these are the people who are out there, you know. And if you look back at Wright, I mean, his writings were not, you know, it's James Cone. It's not like crazy. And understand where that was, and also how old he was, and how that really appealed to him in his imagination. And he had to temper that, and I think he successfully did that. He had to appeal to a larger audience. Yeah, I just don't really listen to that. By the way, his response to the Wright controversy, if you go back and listen to that speech, it was unbelievable. How he got out of that. I mean, I love theology, don't get me wrong, but I am a student of politics. And the thing about Obama that has always amazed me is he plays 3 or 4 dimensional chess, and he's playing with chimps, you know? And so people see, you know, they think they're playing chess, but he is about 12 steps ahead of them. And any political consultant would have told you that with Reverend Wright, it was over for him. Like, that was it. And all he really needed to do was bow out gracefully, and he didn't. He won. Yeah. Great point. All right.
Joe, do you have any questions? Do I? Could you speak a little bit specifically to how you see sort of the reemergence of liberation theology in the church, the ramifications it might have for other faith traditions? Because clearly liberation theology came out of the Hebrew tradition.
Yes.
In many ways, more than the Christian.
Yeah, great point. You asked a couple of really important questions there. How I see, Oh, so the other thing is that liberation theology has changed over time. 2 or 3 generations ago, the issue with liberation theology was violence, revolutionary violence. And so liberation theology was slammed because it was advocating class warfare. And for a long time, Gutierrez has been trying to get out of that box, jettisoning Marxist analysis and saying, well, I'm not wed to Marxist analysis, but it does kind of help us understand the rich and the poor. But I'll get rid of that if it's going to muddy the waters. I think if I write something in the future, it's going to be on this anthropological thing that I suspect other faith traditions, certainly with, I suspect other faith traditions are really going to find a connection with solidarity. You might use different categories to explain this, but my hunch is that your traditions will speak to you and say, oh yeah, this makes sense to me as well. Like, I think Gandhi gets that. But I think the Chinese do too. I mean, this is what's so interesting to me, is that, I don't know, maybe it's just the bubble I grew up in, and because I went to Yale Divinity School, but I think, I've always been so conscious that people with other faith commitments, and it's such a challenge to me to be around people without them. And I almost like, it's amazing what I didn't realize, but they are very, very serious people with real resources who are connecting with the poor and realize this is really important to them, irregardless of politics. Very powerful. Good, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure if I want to do that.
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a special program with Dr. James P. Keane, Vice Principal of Catholic Memorial High School. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The forum is now adjourned.